All right. How to actually understand how the Lightning Network works so that you can coherently explain it to another person without uttering the word payment channel. In other words, how does the Lightning Network really work? 9 out of 10 people, if you ask them how the Lightning Network works, they're going to start by talking about payment channels. And if you stop and ask them, what the heck is a payment channel? They're going to say something like, it's a channel that you pay through. So if you really want to understand actually how this thing is constructed in a coherent, easy to understand way, then go ahead and follow this video. So to start with, I'm going to start with a really simple example. All right, and in this example, we're going to do two people at a Bitcoin meetup where one guy has a bunch of cash and he wants to exchange it with another person that they meet for Bitcoin. Of course, they're doing this. They want to do non KYC, don't want to go through an exchange. They're doing everything person to person. Well, if they were to do this on the blockchain, obviously, they're going to have to wait at least 10 minutes on average. Now, this is going to be a little bit awkward because Bob here has a whole bunch of cash, and so it'd be really nice if he could do it more quickly because in reality, if you did a big cash transaction like this, you're going to want several confirmations possibly, and that's just going to take more time. So, luckily for them, they're going to rely on the Lightning Network where they can do this seamless transaction in about a second. Now, yes, these people apparently don't know about OpenDime or the Sats card or anything like that, but they only know about the digital route, so they really want to use Lightning. So the question is, how does Lightning do this? How is it able to achieve this? Especially when there's no Lightning coin, there's no separate thing. Bitcoiners seem to be very comfortable with the Lightning network. Well, how can that be? Obviously, there's something going on, magic under the hood that we're not understanding. So basically, they open a payment channel. When you open a payment channel, it goes something like this. You know, go ahead and send me your public key. And Bob sends his public key to Alice. So this exchange of a public key to Alice is essentially how you quote unquote open a payment channel. So let's kind of go into a little bit more detail there. Here's Bob's public key. All right, this is what an actual public key looks like. What Alice is going to do is take his public key, combine it with her public key, and she's going to create a multi-sig. Most of you have heard of multi-sig addresses. This particular is a 2 of 2 multi-sig. And what this means is in order to sign and spend this particular type of transaction, you need to have two different signatures from two different public keys, which belong to two different private keys. These two can belong to the same person. In this case, they belong to two different people. So in reality, this is generally written out in hex. That gets hashed, it gets hashed again, and then it gets turned into an address. This is a pay to script hash address. So if we were to put this in a transaction, you would see that Alice, she's going to go ahead and send the money to this multisig. All right. Now, why is Alice sending the money to the multisig? Well, in this particular instance, it's really simple. Because by putting the money in a multisig, she's essentially kind of putting it in an escrow account, so to speak. She's sending the funds to something that only her and Bob can control. So when she meets up with Bob and they're talking about doing this exchange, she can go ahead and do this. Her and Bob can meet up a few hours later. This, meanwhile, goes to the blockchain. It gets confirmed. It gets 6 or 7 confirmations. Later in the day, when Bob comes and meets up with Alice, he's got the cash. Alice inspects the cash, makes sure it's all real, and then Alex goes ahead and her wallet writes the spending transaction, which basically spends the output of the multi-signature and sends it. In this case, we're doing $10,000, which you would never do that. You do 9,990, but whatever. When we're sending that to Bob's address, and Alice is going to go ahead and sign it, and she gives it to Bob. Now, Bob, of course, can sign it whenever he wants, but look at what's happened here. Essentially, Bob, you can think of a signed transaction kind of like a check, because it's paid to the order to, well, it's paid to Bob, that's the output. The input, who is it from? Well, it's from this output, which is a multi-sig. Is the check signed? Well, yeah, it's got Alice's signature and Bob's signature. All right. Well, this check is, good to go. If we're going to continue on with this fiat example, it's kind of like, at the bank, it's a special type of joint transaction, where the only way you can spend funds is if both Bob and Alice have to sign for it. All right. And this is really important to understand for those of you that weren't grasping the multi-sig. So essentially, if we pause right here, we already get a very, very wide overview of why a Lightning transaction is so fast. And the reason is because you're just Bob. All Bob is getting is a signed, valid Bitcoin transaction. It's not partially signed; it's fully signed. But it's written in a way where, just like a check, he doesn't need to worry about the check ever bouncing. In real life, if Alice were to send this to Bob and Bob were to try to hold on to the transaction, that would be silly. Because just like a check, you don't know when you're going to go to the bank and try to cash the check and it's going to bounce. In the same way, while Bob's holding on to this transaction, Alice could go ahead and spend it somewhere else. And then when Bob tries to cash it in by going to the Bank of Bitcoin, also known as sending it to the mempool and getting it confirmed within a block, Bob's going to find that this transaction gets rejected because it's already been spent. But because we've locked it into a 2 multi-sig, Bob can rest assured that this check is basically as good as gold. This transaction, which is ready to be sent to be confirmed within a block whenever he wants, he can bypass that wait for the time being because he knows that there's no way Alice could spend this behind his back because this is a joint account. A joint account. It needs both of them. So essentially, that's what a Lightning payment is. It's an off-chain, valid Bitcoin transaction. This is why there's no Lightning coin or anything like that. Now we're going to get into more of the nitty gritty of different scenarios, but I just want to give that as a broad overview. Now there's a huge problem with this. Obviously, you would never want to do this, what I just described. And in case you're wondering why, well, it's fairly simple. Alice doesn't know Bob. Like, she just met the guy. Yeah, they had a conversation. She feels comfortable enough to exchange money with him, but she don't know him. What happens if she were to do this? If Alice really took $10,000 worth of her Bitcoin, right, and she put it into a multi-sig, and Bob disappears. Now, I know this has never happened. No one has ever had anyone disappear on them on Craigslist or OfferUp or Facebook Marketplace. I know it's never happened. But let's just say it happens, all right? Bob gets cold feet. He goes to the bank and he realizes, you know what? I don't really want to do this. I don't trust this lady. So he just disappears. And he was using a burner number. What happens to Alice? Alice has lost her money. All right. Now, why has she lost her money? She sent all her money to this address, and this address is a multi-sig. The only way it can be spent is with both her and Bob signing. Bob is a ghost. Bob is gone. So she effectively burned all her funds. And I know the rest of the people on the Bitcoin network were like, yay, more Bitcoin for us. You just lowered the supply. But this is not good for Alice. You would never want to do this in real life. So just note that. So now I'm just, I'm framing it this way so you can understand step by step how these transactions are constructed. So let's go ahead and start over, right? And let's try to do this correctly. So if we were to start over, once again, Alice is going to send the money to a multi-sig address. That's not going to change. But this time, before she sends it to the Bitcoin network, she's going to go ahead and spend. She's going to create a commitment transaction. So this transaction hasn't even been sent to the blockchain, but that's okay. You can write another transaction spending it, and she's going to send all that money to herself. She's basically giving herself a refund. And then she's going to go ahead and sign it, and she's going to give it to Bob. Now, Bob's going to look at it and be like, okay, I'll sign that, because remember, they haven't done anything yet, Bob is basically saying, sure, you can have your money back, this is Alice's money, So assuming Bob does this, now Alice can go ahead, submit this to the blockchain, and get confirmed. And now essentially this is effectively what happens when you open a payment channel. Alice can do this because if Bob disappears, no sweat off her brow. She can just turn this in. She's got her check. She's got her perfectly valid Bitcoin transaction that's signed. All she has to do is send it to the mempool. It'll get confirmed in the next block, and she's good. So essentially, she has her check. She has her check that she knows cannot go bad. So what happens now if they decide to do the deed later? So her and Bob meet up. Alice inspects the funds. They decide to do the trade. Well, it's easy, right? Alice just rips up the check. I'm going to rip it up, and I'm going to write you a new check. Spending this, and it's going to send all the funds to you, Bob, right? And then I'm going to sign it, give it to you, and then you can go ahead and sign it. So now Bob is good as gold, right? Well, obviously, no. This runs into our second problem. If this was a check, okay, this may work. We can rip it up. But the fact is, this isn't a physical check, it's a digital check. So Bob has no way of knowing if Alice would ever delete it. Even if Alice showed him his phone, like, look, Bob, I'm hitting delete. I'm hitting empty trash. How could he ever know that she really trashed it? So in reality, we have now two checks, two transactions, both of which are completely valid, and both of them are good. So it's really, we have sort of a race condition. Who can get it to the blockchain first and get it confirmed? Let's assume both of them have the same exact fees attached to them. Well, it just becomes a race. So this is no bueno. This isn't going to work either. Bob can't really rest assured that this is going to be good. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. This is the last time, I promise you. Third time's a charm. And I'm going to walk you through how Lightning achieves this goal of quote unquote ripping up the check. So again, Alice is going to send her funds to a 2 of 2 multisig. That's not going to change. And she's going to go ahead and write the commitment transaction. But instead of sending all the money to her own address, she's going to send it to what's called an RSMC, or a revocable sequence maturity contract. Ooh, sounds really scary. Actually, it's not. I'll break it down, and you'll see how it literally means exactly what these words mean in English. Okay, so this is essentially a smart contract. Now, I know, Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts. Bitcoin's dumb, but that's not true. Bitcoin has a very robust scripting language. Even a multisig is a script. It's something that's executable. It has intelligence. Obviously, something has to confirm that this is true. This is probably the most simple script on Bitcoin. We're going to make a little bit more complicated script, but here's how it works. First is this smart contract or script, whatever you want to call it, it's going to pay to Alice. All right, so this is still a refund, right? But instead of just paying to her directly, we're going to make Alice wait 24 hours. We're going to give her a waiting period. Why we're going to make her wait doesn't matter right now. We'll get to that in a second. In addition to that, we're going to add another condition. All right, Bitcoin scripting language allows you to have multiple spending conditions. So there's going to be another condition in which Bob can potentially get paid. And the only way Bob can get paid is if he fulfills basically another 2 of 2 multisig. And this 2 of 2 multisig, you need Alice Rev pub key. What the heck is this? Well, the Rev in this stands for a revocation key. All right. So unless you have both Alice's revocation key and Bob's revocation key, Bob's not going to get paid. So what the heck is a revocation key? Well, when they both when Alice constructs this and works with Bob to make this transaction, in addition, Alice and Bob come up with a brand new private key. A brand new private key. It's their revocation private key. And of course, with every private key, you can construct a public key. But they do not share this with each other. The only thing they share is the revocation public key, because they need the public keys to construct this transaction. Now, why do they do that? We'll get into that in just a minute, but just know for the time being, this transaction is still a refund to Alice with a wait. Bob cannot get paid yet because the only way Bob can get paid is if he gets Alice's signature for her revocation pub key. And he can't do that because he doesn't know the revocation private key, right? Because this is a whole new set of keys. So we're going to go into a second why this is even here. So for the time being, let's just go ahead and ignore the first condition and let's focus on this second condition for just a second. So this wait 24 hours is a time lock, and it's generally speaking it's done in blocks. So 24 hours is 144 blocks. So it may not be exactly 24 hours depending on what the block times were in this period. It could be a little bit less, it could be a little bit more. But the next question is, how does that even work? Because time locks on Bitcoin is you have absolute time locks and you have relative time locks. An absolute time lock means you can lock an address to a specific time in the future, like February 28th, 2025. That's an absolute. A relative is wait 24 hours. Well, how is that even enforced? Well, it's really simple. Let's say they they continue with this, right? And Alice signs it, Bob signs it, and Alice goes ahead and submits this to the Bitcoin blockchain, and she's good. She's happy, everyone's happy. But then what happens? Bob ghosts her. He ghosts her because he's scared. He ghosts her because he realized, you know what, I don't want to do this, all right? Well, Alice is not in trouble at all because what? She can go ahead and submit this transaction, which is signed and ready to go to the blockchain. And let's say she submits it at 12/2/22 at 8 a.m. All right, obviously I put the wrong year here, but whatever. I'm still getting used to 2023. And she posts this to the blockchain. Well, remember, this doesn't pay to her, right? It pays to this script, this smart contract. So, in order to actually get paid, she needs to create another transaction. But just to be clear, as soon as this goes on the blockchain and gets confirmed, that's when the clock starts. All right. So, if she really wants to get paid, she needs to submit another transaction. This would be the spending transaction, where she's now taking all the funds and sending them to her address. All right. Now, let's say she were to do this like 2 hours later. She did this at 8 a.m. and she submitted this at 10 a.m. As soon as she submitted this, as soon as this transaction, which is valid, because it says pay to Alice, as soon as it hits the mempool, it's going to get rejected. It's going to get rejected because, in fact, it really isn't valid, because the mempool can read this script and it'll say, hey, has it been 144 blocks or 24 hours since this transaction? No, it hasn't. It's only been 2 hours. So denied, it's going to be rejected. All right. So that's how these relative time locks work. Now, as soon as 24 hours has passed, then Alex can go ahead and submit this to the blockchain. The mempool won't reject it, and whatever miner mines the transaction won't reject it. Everything will be good. So Alice will be happy. So now the question remains is, why are we making Alice wait 24 hours? Well, for that, in case it's not obvious already, let's just back up for a second and follow through with an actual trade with Bob. So if Bob shows up, all right, Bob gives her the cash. She's going to go ahead and create the next commitment transaction, which sends all the fund to Bob. All right, we've already been through this. But this time, she's going to sign it with her revocation signature. Basically, she's going to sign for this key. As soon as she does that, Bob's good. Bob considers this deal complete because he can sign it whenever he wants. But Bob now knows that this check is now pretty much as good as gold. Now, why is it good as gold? Well, in case it's not blatantly obvious, I'll show you why. So Bob gets this transaction, and he just goes and he's driving home now. He drives home, and he's good. The transaction settled. He's listening to his music. But Alice decides to try to cheat him, right? Because remember, the whole point is, how do we know Alice really ripped up this check? Well, let's assume Alice didn't rip up this check. We know Alice has this check. So Alice submits this to the blockchain. It gets published to the blockchain. The clock starts. Well, Bob may be driving with the music blaring, but what's happening is his wallet is not asleep. His wallet is constantly looking at every transaction. As soon as this transaction hits the mempool, Bob's wallet knows, oh, you're trying to cheat. Alice is trying to cheat me. But so what does Bob do? Well, all Bob has to do is what? Publish this transaction to the blockchain. Now, because if we look at this, look, Alice has to wait 24 hours, right? Guess who doesn't have to wait? Bob. Bob can spend and create a transaction to his own address. He can do that immediately because he has no wait time and he has everything he needs. He's got Alice's revocation signature and he's got his own signature. Therefore, he can get paid. Alice cannot, because Alice, no matter what, has to wait 24 hours. So if Alice tries to cheat and go behind his back and basically say, you know what, I didn't rip up the check. Haha, I'm going to steal from you. Bob has 24 hours to catch her. He just needs to be watching the network with his node, with his neutrino wallet on his phone, or whatever. So, this is how you metaphorically rip up the check. It's literally a simple mechanism of a multi-sig and a time lock. All right. Now, I hope this makes sense. A revocable, because we're literally revoking, you know, we're revoking by implication because you can never revoke something valid. We're revoking it because we're disincentivizing her. We're putting a burden on her of time that we do not have. Sequence, because these transactions are in sequence. Maturity is over time. Alice has to wait time. So this is a revocable sequence maturity contract. All right. So now that example was pretty basic because we spent the whole amount. In reality, we would want to do this more like a tab. Alice is a, mild alcoholic. And so she always has a tab open with Bob's Bar. So if she were to do this with Bob's Bar, in reality, it would open, with a full refund to herself. But every time she goes and buys a drink, she spends $10 and she's got $90 left. That creates a new transaction. And the old transaction effectively gets ripped up. And the most current transaction would be $90 to Alice, $10 to Bob. Alice buys another drink. Same thing. We're ripping up that check, writing a new check. Spend another $10, spend another $10. And each time, all these transactions are valid. Like, we know Alice didn't rip up the check, right? We know she has them. But we can rest assured that we're safe because if Alice ever tries to cheat, the same process is redone on every transaction. She has to wait. Bob doesn't. Does that make sense? And so this is how we're able to update things. Now in this case, the penalty gets a little bit more intense because if Alice tries to cheat at this point, right? She's already spent 60 and she has 40 that she hasn't even spent. If she tries to cheat Bob, right? Bob is just going to go back and technically he can take any of these, but obviously he's going to cash out the initial one. He's going to take back the full $100. So he's going to be up $160, so to speak. I mean, not really, just $100, but Alice is going to be out all her funds. So she is fully disincentivized from cheating because she's constructed her valid Bitcoin transactions in a way such that she has to wait a certain amount of time and Bob does not. All right. So, lastly, this is all great between Alice and Bob, right? But what about everyone else in the world? Alice has a tab open with Bob because she's a mild alcoholic, and Alice has a tab open with her bestie Kate because they generally go out together to get drinks, and maybe they pay for each other at different times. So if Alice goes to the gas station, right, and she wants to, make a payment for her gas using Lightning, how is she going to do that? Is she going to open another payment channel? Remember, every time you open a payment channel, you're effectively tying up your own Bitcoin funds. Now you're doing it in a way where you're guaranteed to get your money back and no one can cheat, but this isn't very practical. How is it that this Lightning network, quote unquote, is even useful? Well, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, it turns out, because Kate also is going to have a channel open with Gordon, her boss, because, Gordon has her run and get lunch for him, and he just reimburses her over Lightning. And Gordon has a payment channel open with the hardware store, and the hardware store has a payment channel open with Paul and Bob, and Paul has a payment channel open with the gas station. So 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is, it turns out all Alice needs in order to pay Shell is not a direct connection. She just needs a path through the network, through the series of connections throughout everyone in the network. She simply needs a path in order to pay Shell. Because if she has a path, then she can route that payment. Okay, well, what does that mean to route a payment? So, fairly simple. So she goes to Shell and she's like, hey, I'm going to pay you $20 for gas. Shell creates an invoice and says, hey, look, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to create a secret, all right? The secret's going to be, generally, it's a key. It's a number, and then I'm going to scramble it. I'm going to hash it. And I'm going to give you that hashed secret, all right? All you have is the hash. You don't have the secret. Now, this is called a hash pre-image. The secret is called a pre-image, just in case you were wondering, And with that, it turns out Alice now has a way to make these payments. So let's say with her and Kate, currently, right now, if we were to pause, they're at a 50-50 distribution, right? Because apparently they've gone out an equal amount of times, and I just want a nice even numbers. So what Alice is going to do is she's going to be like, you know what? First, just to remind you, this isn't paid to Alice's address. It's paid to a revocable sequence maturity contract, so that way Kate knows that Alice isn't going to run off with all the funds. But what Alice is going to do is she's just going to say, you know what? I want to pay $20 to Shell, so I'm just going to decrement 20 from my maturity contract, and I'm going to create a new output, paying $20 to Kate, but it's not really going to Kate. It's going to something new. It's going to an HTLC. This is a hash time locked contract. This is the one that maybe most of you have heard about. You hear about these a lot more. So what's a hash time lock contract? It's really simple. Basically, a hash time lock contract is, this is the pseudocode, is if you get the payment secret, you get paid. Now in actuality, it says, hey, give me something. I'm going to hash it. And if that hash equals the scrambled payment secret, which is a hash, then you get paid. So basically you need to have the secret. So Kate's like, okay, I guess I'll do this. But in reality, she may not even know Kate. Kate may do this because they're friends. So let's just say that, you know what, Kate, I know you're my friend, but since I'm going to inconvenience you by doing this, I'm going to pay you. So we're going to pay her a couple cents, 4 cents. Now, really, we're paying her less than that, but you'll see in a second. So with this incentive of getting paid, Kate's going to go ahead and do the same exact thing with her boss, Gordon. She's going to be like, hey, Gordon, I'll pay you $20.03 if you can get the payment secret. And Gordon's like, oh, okay. And Gordon forwards that over to the hardware store. Like, hey, hardware store, I'll pay you $20.02 if you can just get the payment secret. And the hardware store says to Paul, I'll give you $20.01 if you get the payment secret. And finally, Paul goes to Shell and says, hey, Shell, I will give you $20 if you can give me the payment secret. Well, Shell is like, okay, here's the payment secret. So Shell goes ahead and gives that payment secret to Paul, and Paul pays Shell $20 out of his money. But then he turns around and he can take that payment secret and then go to the hardware store and say, you know what, pay me $20.01. So Paul nets 1 penny. He paid out 20, but he received $20.01. And this goes ahead and unwinds all the way down. Gordon goes ahead and exchanges, pays $20.02. He exchanges with Kate. He gets paid $20.03. And then Kate exchanges with Alice, and she gets paid $20.04. Kate, Gordon, the hardware store, and Paul, they all net 1 penny. Alice is out 4 pennies, because she had to make sure that everyone got a little bit of cheddar on the way to the Shell gas station. But by doing this simple mechanism, it was able to route through because everyone is incentivized to do this because it only takes a fraction of a second, and they get to make some money, Currently, this would cost a total of 1 cent, probably. And all these people would get fractions of a penny. But all that stuff adds up. This is why running your own node, you can end up making money. So, all in all, again, really basic, this is the Lightning Network. You're literally passing around these checks, so to speak, which are signed Bitcoin transactions that everyone knows that at any moment, if they need to, they could run to the bank of Bitcoin. They can wait in line, aka mempool, and they can get cashed by the cashier, aka mined in a block, and they will get paid. But they don't need to do that, because that takes a lot of time. They'd rather keep it and just update their states and update the amounts using the mechanisms that I just spoke about before. Now it's called hashed time lock, because so far I just covered the time lock, because you don't want all this happening at the very same time. Like as soon as Shell gives the payment secret to Paul, we need to unwind this one layer at a time. So we used a little time lock, to give Paul like an hour to, do his thing, submit to the network, assuming they're all going to post on chain, and the hardware store waits, and then they have to do theirs, so that's where the time lock comes into play. But the most important part is, again, really simple mechanism. It's like I'm going to take a secret and I'm going to hash it and I'm going to promise to pay you if you get that secret. And that promise to pay can route through the network, and that's how you could end up getting paid. So that's basically Lightning Network in a shell. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it. This Lightning Network uses an onion routed network, so it's all encrypted, So all anyone knows, all Kate knows, is that Alice gave her $20.04 and that she's giving Gordon $20.03. She has no idea what the final amount is. Maybe it goes through 20 people and it's down to $19 and whatever, 90 something cents. She has no idea what the final destination is because it's all encrypted where everyone could just see the path before and after them, nothing more, And of course, there's a lot of other things. But we're passing around Bitcoin transactions. That's all we are doing, And that's it. Lightning in a nutshell. That's about all I have. So I'm hoping for some of you that for the first time you finally have a deeper understanding rather than just saying the word payment channel. And if anything, I hope any of you watching are kind of amazed by the simple mechanism of a multi-sig and a time lock and a hash can do this amazing layer 2 type technology. So yeah, if you enjoyed that video and just want to help a brother out, I'm not going to stop you. I ain't got no shame, It takes a lot of work to put these together. And if you just really want to dive into more info, then check out my website, Now, don't sue me, bro. I registered this domain and paid my money to GoDaddy and got this all set up before the whole Bitcoin, not crypto narrative came out. So I'm not changing it, all right? It is Crypto Teach, even though really it's Bitcoin Teach, But if you really want to dive much deeper into all these topics, from how Bitcoin works from the beginning to the end, to proof of work, to understanding fully about Lightning, about channel factories, and learning about inheritance, how to set up your own multi-sig, how to buy Bitcoin, all the different ways, non KYC, everything you can imagine about learning about things that matter about Bitcoin, then check out my website. I got free little clips on all my videos if you want to check them out. But I will be releasing free stuff on Twitter. The next video I'm going to cover channel factories and how Lightning can scale to billions.